So, hello, Matt, and hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining the Social Housing podcast from Voicescape. I'm delighted to be joined today by Matthew Baird from District 4 Social Housing Recruitment and the Social Housing Roundtable. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you very much for having me, Pete. It's really nice to have been invited on.
Not at all, not at all. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, Matthew. I think our paths in social housing, whilst they hadn't really crossed until very recently, have taken quite a similar journey. And I think particularly, let's start talking around the social housing roundtable. I chair a very similar group, the Income Service Network group. So I'd like to kick off the conversation today, Matthew, to state, there are loads of brilliant people in social housing, and my feeling was that there perhaps wasn't enough opportunities for them to come together, to collaborate, to share ideas and best practice. So why do you feel that groups like the Income Service Network Group and the Social Housing Roundtable are so important to the sector?
Yeah, I mean, I know we've had a very, very brief discussion about it, and it's great to have crossed paths. I think there's not enough of businesses out there, as you mentioned there, that give the opportunities to do that. For me, when I look at the Social Housing Roundtable, and I look at obviously your Income Services Networking Group, quite often and for me, I guess it's two faceted. One is that if you go to things like the CIH conference or the NatFed conference or like the big conferences, it's only really kind of directors and chief execs who are there. Sometimes you'll get a head of service, but by and large, it's those kind of right at the very top of the tree, as it were, who don't always have very recent on the ground experience, and actually that experience is invaluable. But also, they cost quite a lot of money, and trying to get time off and trying to get booked, again, it becomes the same names of either big organisations or people who can afford to let people go, whatever it'll be. And I know from both your networking group and my own that some of the best input, thoughts, ideas, reactions that you get are from people who will never be at those conferences or don't get the chance to be invited or might just have been to one, but it's a very large group, and often you just kind of sat there as part of a panel watching some other people kind of discuss things. You don't get to input very much. So
Yeah.
the joy of the Social Housing Roundtable, and I'm sure it's the same with yours, is the diversity of people, the diversity of organisations that you get through, and the real debate. We get tenants coming onto the roundtable, and we get chief execs. And quite often, they'll be from different businesses, but they don't cross paths. So there'll be an idea thrown out there that you just don't hear in a normal networking group. And it was quite a compliment recently, actually, for somebody who we were doing a damp and mould roundtable. There was a similar one going on from a large housing provider. And a few people left the housing providers wanted to come to my roundtable and said, all that's going on the other podcast is people talking, also the other, I guess, networking group, is people complaining. Whereas here, you're coming up with ideas and going, this is what can actually impact change. And I think that's where networking at its best really kind of comes to fruition.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, we've certainly found that you get some proper actionable takeaways from these groups, to the people that can actually make those changes and implement them really quickly. And I suppose that's my 10 years now supporting the social housing sector. What I've relished is the opportunity to embrace those conversations where I'm speaking to somebody that's got a great idea and they're willing to share that. And that's a beautiful thing in social housing. It's people often get into social housing for that greater social purpose. But then if they can spread that in a non-competitive environment, I think
there was a lot of fear, wasn't there, with people? And I remember, like I said, I've been doing recruitment now in social housing for 11 years, but I remember there was a recruitment networking group that started up. And for so long, people were like, oh, we can't go to that. We'll share ideas. They'll steal our ideas. They'll steal what we're doing.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, but they won't to do with your clients if you talk vaguely. But why not improve everybody by everyone getting a voice? And I think that's what the roundtable and the networking group, the Income Services Networking Group, are all about. It's getting people around the table and going, right, well, what could we do collaboratively? Who has an idea? Because I'm on the board for Spring Housing and I'm involved in other things, but you never know who's going to give you that little light bulb moment to go, actually, that's something we could do. And then it comes down to, as you'll know, business culture to see whether or not that can actually be implemented. But it's brilliant to hear. And being able to facilitate those conversations. And I'm sure you feel the same when you just get some really good people who just want a voice almost, and are quite often don't always have it. It's brilliant to see them kind of be really respected for having their own ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone that is listening and is interested in joining the social housing roundtable, how would they get in touch? How would they best join you, Matthew?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is always brilliant
Yeah.
for me. I mean, all my email address and my phone number and everything else are on there. There is a link tree, just called the SHRT, so you can find it through there. Or just, like I said, just drop me an email. LinkedIn's usually the easiest way to get in touch with me, but if not, just matt.baird@district4.io. And you can, I'll get you set up on the mailing list. There's a mailing list and the rest of it, but there's a LinkedIn group. There's also a YouTube channel, so you can go on and watch the recordings there, which I think is also really nice because, and I'm sure it's the same with you and the recordings that you share. People so often want to get involved, but I mean, we run it every single week, which is a lot, but it's every Tuesday, 11 till 12, and it gets a lot running them. We're actually doing 2 next week, which is, anyway, it's one of those. I'm a sucker for punishment, I guess. And the joy of it is that if people do miss it and can't join, they can still go back and watch the recordings on YouTube and then provide feedback. And actually, that's where a lot of people who've watched those recordings back say, "Hi, I've seen you doing the roundtable. Can I get involved?" And it's just nice that it builds organically in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll stick the links on the page below as well. And I think just coming back to one of the topics that you mentioned earlier, damp and mould, I've recently just come back from the Housing Technology Conference, and it was everywhere. The topic, that is, not damp and mould. But I think if we look at the operating environment of social housing, the sector's always under the spotlight. There's some big issues. There's a headline, and often with some incredibly serious consequences. But and I know that the majority of people are doing as much as they can to rectify those issues, but the headlines will always be there. But when we start to look at the people at the top, do you think there's enough accountability being taken? And I know that they're always being discussed. And is there enough being done to review and rectify those big challenges? Do you feel?
It's an interesting one, and I think there've been a lot of controversies over the last year, as we know. I mean, you've got Awab's law, which has now come in due to, as you mentioned, their damp and mould and the tragedy of the young boy dying. We've had issues. Obviously, I mean, we had Grenfell. Like, it feels like it was forever ago now, but it really wasn't. It's still very much recent history. And then you've had things like went on with, obviously, the tenant who was deceased in their flat for 2 years before their body was found. And stories like this are, I feel, kind of coming more and more to fruition because you've got people really speaking up, and social media has obviously blown a lot of these stories up, and rightfully so. I think accountability is probably the biggest buzzword in social housing at the moment, and rightfully so. It's a difficult one because where does the buck stop? Obviously with our and everything that happened there, the chief exec eventually resigned through the board. Even though originally he said he refused, and the buck does lie with him. You do kind of go, well, what's happened to directive assets? What's happened to the people who were, meant to be looking after these homes? And what about things like the call centre? What was going on there? So it's very easy to go, the accountability is always at the top, but it depends on the size of the business and the level of communication. I think the problem is the stigma of social housing and everything that goes with it. There is still this belief that people who live in social housing are somehow lesser or more stupid or whatever it might be. And it's really, really interesting to sit there and really discuss with so many people where should the buck lie. Is it the board, for example? But then how much information does the board know? And when you look at the stigma, and I mean, I've spoken to directors of housing who've really, particularly because of damp and mould, to be honest with you, have done a bit of a deep dive into their complaints process, realising that actually some of the call centre staff aren't being empathetic. They're kind of going, "Oh, God, it's another one. Fine, yeah, we'll deal with it. Just we'll add it to the list." Like, it really, disinterested almost, and not really thinking about the fact that it's human beings living in these properties that aren't up to standard. We could talk about policies and things like right to buy and things like that over the years that have unfortunately removed an awful lot of really high quality stock, and then was sold on into the private market. So there is really old stock that isn't fit for purpose, that businesses can't afford to just knock down and replace. Someone needs a home, so someone lives there, and then not getting to the root cause of the problem. So it's a huge thing. I think we're going to see more and more of it. Lara Oyer-Daly, who is the president of the CIH and who I know very well, always talks about the 1%. And by that, if you're on a board and someone says, well, 99% achieved on this, on that KPI and that KPI, well, brilliant. But what about the 1%? Because if you've got 20,000 homes, that's 2,000 properties, or 200 properties. Out of those 200 properties, how bad is the situation in those? Because it just takes one. And you get stories like that get blown up all over the media, and people are dying. So it's about really deep diving into all of your stock, and I think that's where the other side of accountability comes from boards, from chief execs, from directors. Is just because you're hitting a KPI doesn't mean you're succeeding right across the board. I think that's something that really needs to change. I have a real issue with KPIs in social housing anyway, because a lot of them are, I think, sometimes just utilised to make people look good, rather than actually going, well, where are the problems and are we dealing with the whole problem, rather than going, oh, you got damp and mould, cool, we'll come out, we'll bleach the walls and we'll leave you to it, knowing that it's going to come back in 6 months, because it has done every 6 months for the last 10 years.
I think, and that is such a fascinating point. I think, the tenant's voice has become such a, more than a buzzword, it's become a thread throughout social housing now. I think housing associations across the board do have a genuine appetite to hear the tenant's voice, and I think things like the TSM are going to support that. But interestingly, there's quite a contrast when speaking with social landlords around TSM, wanting to recognise what's the best way of capturing that sort of feedback. Some landlords are scared to reduce the satisfaction response rates or satisfaction levels in favour of getting a better result, but not actually knowing the truth. And it's, whereas others aren't scared of getting a low TSM and being bottom of that leaderboard, as long as they're getting, that's getting to the 1%, isn't it?
And I do a lot of work with a lady called Jo Leckie of Big Picture Training, because that's her whole training comes down to culture around customer service. And it's exactly that you're talking about. It's that piece of, the government have said today that there's going to be social tenants to get the opportunity to scrutinise landlords' strategies and policies under new proposals. And we're going to keep hearing more and more of this. And I had a tenant recently who was on the social housing roundtable. And I said, and it was about tenant engagement versus tenant influence. And what was amazing in that was actually one of the tenants going, I've no interest in engaging with my social landlord. I just want to be left alone and have my house. And if I have an issue, get it fixed.
Yeah.
And actually, as we did a bit of a deep dive, you realised that's because they have been so fed up of not being listened to and just ignored. And they felt that if they were going to get involved, if they were going to be brought into a conversation, actually it doesn't matter what they say, it would just get ignored at the end of the day. That's why they have no interest at all in getting involved with their landlord.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of the issues come, is tenants are fed up of not being listened to, are fed up of not being kind of utilised for the skills. And there's some amazing people who are tenants in social housing. But back in the 60s and 70s, people wanted a social housing property. That's the irony of it. Good quality stock, people wanted them, they were affordable. It was great if you got one. Now they're almost seen as, oh, you live in social housing, or there's something go wrong in your life. No, it's just affordable. And it's good. There's a lot of good quality accommodation out there. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of bad. Yeah. So I think this idea of stigmatising tenants, but also, as you mentioned there, of not listening to that influence and not listening to that feedback and getting feedback for the sake of getting feedback. Yeah. You can boost your figures.
I know.
What is the point?
Yeah.
If you're not going to do anything with it, if you're not going to really engage with those. I love these businesses that say, oh, we've got problem tenants. Great, let's get them in and talk to them. I know Saffron Housing, who are over in Norfolk, did just this, because I know Hannah Harvey very well over there. And she came onto a roundtable and was very honest about it and said, yeah, we had serious problems when I joined the company a number of years ago. We were in all kind of trouble with the regulation and everything else. Our properties weren't good enough. And we got the most problematic tenants, as they've been labelled, and the tenants with the loudest voices on Facebook and other areas. And we brought them in and said, right, what are we getting wrong? Let's have a chat. Let's get you on side by telling you we will change it. We need to know what you need changing.
Yeah.
And the difference that had in culture, mentality, and listening to the actual issues of what's going on, rather than trying to fix what they believed need fixing. They went, what is it that's actually wrong? Because you're living in our properties. What's wrong? Let's work together to fix it. And that was, we need more of that, I feel, in the sector.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. It's having that 360 view and that awareness that addressing things up front actually can lead to a great thing. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I've just come back from the Housing Technology Conference, and the panel discussion on Wednesday morning opened with 5 CIOs of some pretty large organizations. Most of their backgrounds, in fact, if not all of them, wasn't social housing at all. It was corporate IT, and they've fallen into social housing. What came across from every single one of them was their passion for making a difference. And actually that reflective moment when they decided to go through the recruitment process and move into social housing, I can make a difference to people's lives here, and that social purpose. So when you, as a recruiter into the social housing space, and I'm hearing this all the time, why do you think there is such a big challenge getting good people into social housing? Is there a skills deficit? Is the wages not attractive enough? Is the sector not sexy enough? What's the biggest challenge for social landlords getting the right people or the best people right now?
I mean, it's a blend of what you've said there. Going through, only the first time I heard about social housing as a sector to work in was when I started recruiting in it 11 years ago. I knew nothing about it. I'd never heard it. I joined an agency at the time. I mean, like I said, I set up for my own tool a bit years ago, and it's the best thing I did, but you learn your craft through an agency. And they said, well, you're going to recruit in social housing. I said, how do you recruit for tower blocks? I don't understand. And that's what I knew. I knew it's council housing, I knew it's tower blocks. That's what I knew. So first and foremost, no one knows about it. And this, you may have seen recently, the government has said now that they're going to be introducing mandatory qualifications into social housing. There are pros and cons in that. They're saying it's been for management and above, and these kind of things. I think they're missing a trick by not doing more apprenticeships from a young age to get people into it and to train up. And whether or not the training's right and stuff is a whole other debate. But there's an issue of people not knowing about the sector. Wages are always going to be a challenge, but then there are some incredible wages in social housing. There's some people on a lot of money. Every year, Inside Housing does a CEO report. And some of the CEOs are on more money than the Prime Minister. And let's not beat around the bush. They're on some incredible cash. So there is money out there, and most chief execs, and I mean this isn't all, but most are on 6 figures plus. So there's definitely a career trajectory there. Whether wages are fair across every level is a whole other debate, and I don't feel they are. I think it's a big issue with what people call entry level roles or housing officer roles. There's also a big problem with people having left the sector post-COVID. Housing became a very traumatic sector for many through the whole pandemic and everything and the lockdowns. And a lot of people burned out and maybe weren't given the support they needed or weren't given enough encouragement to maybe come back and take the time they needed. But also, some people kind of went, actually, I'm going to go be an independent consultant. And finally, I guess my big one, and it kind of ties in a bit about what you said there, and it's an interesting one about CIOs going, I want to go in, I want to make a difference, which is amazing and exactly what the sector needs. At the very top of social housing, it is still very, very white and male. And yet you look across the sector as a whole, and it isn't. There's so much diversity across the sector as a whole. And I mean, I can talk about it because it was on the thing. There was one very large housing association, the G15, who recently recruited a new chief exec from completely outside the social housing space who'd never worked in it. And it created a lot of controversy because he was a white guy. And people were kind of going, you had the opportunity here to be your big London landlord to kind of go, right, well, let's introduce some diversity somewhere into our business, or let's showcase maybe what we're doing. But, or at least if we're going to recruit a white male, let's recruit someone who's been in the whole thing space for a number of years. To just recruit from outside in, the sector does need to change. It needs fresh ideas, and I completely agree with that. But on the flip side, it also needs, there are businesses like that, the larger businesses, that need to lead from the front on diversity. And if someone can showcase, well, actually, I've worked in the sector for 20 years, it's all I've achieved, then brilliant, no one's going to question it. If someone who's never worked in it to get the role over someone who has probably worked in the sector for 15, 20 years, worked their way up and through, they're kind of going, I've been overlooked again, why bother staying in it? And I'm speaking to a lot of people, unfortunately, and they are often non-white and often female people who are turning around and saying, I'm done. I've been working on this for however long, and I just keep getting overlooked for every role. And there's recruiting in the executive space is an interesting one. I think that a lot of the big names which go round and round and round, there's some large businesses who are very well known for doing executive recruitment in the social housing world. They kind of just recycling the same names round and round again. It's the same people being put round and put round. So when I've done executive recruitment, when I've spoken to people about actually what I'm going to do differently, it's not always about psychometric testing. It's not about going through all this stuff. It's going, well, actually, these are people that share your values or want the values that where the business is going. And this is a diverse shortlist. Because anyone tells me who in housing can't produce a diverse shortlist, I'll be honest with you, it's either being lazy or they're lying. Because there is so much diversity and so many people chomping at the bit for an opportunity. It's difficult then for people who just go, I've just had enough. They leave the sector, they set up on their own, or they go and set up a consultancy service that works with the sector. But it means the sector are losing good people. So there are issues across recruitment and retention right across the board. Salaries are tough, particularly when you look at support workers and the money available in supported housing. You're looking 24, 25, 26,000. A few years ago, okay, fine, I could probably get by on that. These days, that doesn't get you anywhere. Particularly if you're more London or big city based. So it's a challenge. It's a real challenge for the sector, and I don't know where they're going to find more money. Mergers are a whole other problem unto themselves, but I think we need to start kind of saying there should be I put up a poll that said, should there be a cap on chief exec salaries? And we had like 250, 300 votes, and it was 50-50. Yes and no. And I think if I put it along the lines of, should there be a cap in line with a percentage increase from your lowest paid worker, I think a lot of people would have said yes. Because I think that's where the disparity is. It's if you've got a chief exec on 300,000 and you're happy to pay, but you're not willing to pay 120,000 to a support worker, then something there isn't matching up.
No, I think that you can slice that cake up many different ways, and I think if you look at both ends of it, and I've seen the challenges with getting the right people into these roles, and I think let's start at the top end at the chief exec level. There's a lot of people that wouldn't be attracted to the social housing sector because, frankly, and if we look in the commercial sector, they could probably earn significantly more for managing a similar size organisation with similar budgets, but without the risk. And let's not forget this is a sector that's under a heavy spotlight. So I kind of get that, but I do think it needs to be in proportion with the total workforce. And at the other end,
no good news stories. I completely agree with you there on this part, because everything coming out at the moment is this is a sector that's in trouble, it's falling apart, it's a nightmare. And partly that is national rhetoric. But I agree with you. There's so many good news. There's so much amazing work that goes on, but that's never in the media.
No. And it's that 1% again that Laura refers to, and it's actually far less than 1%, that makes the headlines, and it's a really sad state. But those that are in the sector know those good stories, and it's and the great work that goes on to support our tenants. But at the other end, and this is something I wanted to speak to you about as well. So I had dinner with a director recently, and she was telling me that in their customer services team and their income collection team, they've stopped recruiting from within the sector. They've not made a blanket decision, but that they've typically not been doing that, and they've been recruiting from restaurants, from cafes, from hotels, people with great customer service, and they've had huge success in doing that. What's your view, and what would you advise your clients to do?
Couldn't agree more. There is, I think what's interesting is there's been a lot of bad practice in some businesses. There just has, and people have kind of gone round and round. I've been in it for a number of years, and they're just, housing in itself has changed. They're frustrated with the sector themselves.
Yeah.
That pays in the customer service and the rest of it. I was with I was going down, I sat down with his board and the directors of the business to talk about recruiting recently, particularly in kind of supported housing and in customer service. And particularly with temp, we're struggling to hire staff to come in and hit the ground running and things like that. And I was like, okay, well, talk me through your last bit of recruitment. And this team had hired three new staff. One of them was really experienced, and the other two brand new to the sector and very green, as it were. And the most experienced person didn't work out. And I was like, well, that's why. And so we did a bit of a deep dive. And what became clear was, first and foremost, when you've got somebody who is new to the sector, you spend more time with them. So therefore, they're getting more of the culture. They're getting more of that impact. They're not expected just, right, there's your first induction, right, off you go and crack on. So that makes a big impact because you buy into the business. People used to stay in roles they hated because their friends were there or because they liked the manager. They might not like the job, but you stayed in it for longer because I'm sure you had the same when you were growing up. That's what you did. You stayed in a role for 4, 5, 6 years. Yeah. These days, 2 to 3 is normal. So there's that side, but also that's how we get more people into the sector. Because if you go to a restaurant and there's somebody who is absolutely exemplary, and you can get them to come in as a trainee housing officer, support worker, contact centre advisor, whatever it might be. Team leader, if they've got good management skills. Let's not forget that people are often promoted because they're good at the job they do, not because they're good managers. So team leaders are, if you've got somebody who's got really good management skills and they can learn how a call centre works, well, then let's get them in and go with it. But also then they will tell their friends, their good friends, they're people that they're going, actually, you'd be brilliant, come and work with me, you can build a career here, because that's the other side of it, and I'm sure you'll agree, is yes, people burned out, as I mentioned before, yes, people are leaving the sector, but for a lot of people, they're people who've been in the sector for 20 plus years. Most people who fall into housing stay in it, and stay in it for a long, long time. Very few come in for 2 years, very, very, very few come in for a couple of years and then leave. They come in and, as you said, that social purpose, that reasoning behind your job, that understanding of, I know why I do the role that I do, really makes a difference, because it matters to people, particularly amongst the generations that are coming through now. Social purpose is everything, and places fall down because they don't advertise their social purpose. So many businesses, and you'll know this in social housing, business go, we need housing officers, we need support workers, yada, yada, yada. We need heads of service. But when you go onto their website, when you try and do a deep dive into what they're all about, you can't find it because there's so much humbleness that goes on in housing. No one's willing to champion their best stories or actually why they are a good employer. What makes you brilliant to work for? We just support our tenants and that kind of, right, well, tell me how, tell me why. And when you're good at that, then you attract more staff.
Absolutely, and I don't think that the social purpose should be underestimated. Even though I'm kind of 2 degrees separated, I had a sabbatical out of social housing, and you don't underestimate the impact that has on a Friday night when I get home and I think about what I've done. I know that the work that we do as a technology provider to the social housing space has an immense impact on people's lives, and that. The impact that has on my well-being, my positivity, my outlook on life shouldn't be underestimated. And I think you're right. That's why people stay in social housing for so long. It's a thread, often unspoken thread that goes through their career. So let's take a slight change in topic, and that's around sort of the macroeconomic climate that we find ourselves in now. And I think, unfortunately, like a lot of these macroeconomic challenges, social housing and social housing tenants find themselves probably at the sharper end of that. Things like the cost of living crisis, the fuel crisis right now. And I've recognised the great work that a lot of landlords are doing to not only support their tenants, but support their staff. And is that something that you're seeing a lot of? And what impact is that having on recruitment and keeping people in social housing?
retention is massive, and as you've mentioned before, a lot of people who work in social housing know they could earn more if they go to the private sector, but they stay in it for the social purpose. But social purpose doesn't pay the bills.
Yeah.
And I think this is where I'm really seeing now the difference between community-led, smaller providers and big, large, basically private sector businesses that work in social housing but still classified as registered providers.
Mhm.
Because I recruit for one business up in the northeast that the chief exec and the directors chose to take no pay rise at all through the cost of living side to ensure that all of their staff at a below kind of 35k all got a pay rise to ensure that it was a significant pay rise to make sure that our balances were offset. Businesses in Birmingham, like the one that like Spring, who I'm a board of, made sure there was money coming in that was found to make sure that bills could be paid, support was given. And what was clear, and I think this is twofold. Firstly, look, thank you for giving us some money. This is amazing. It means a lot. But B, we can see you being fair. Yes, you haven't got, we're not one of these big businesses where you're on hundreds of thousands and loads of money, but you've given us, we'd love more, but what you've given us is fair, and we understand why that was there, because I can see where the money's been spread across the business. And I think that's the other side of it. And I think this is where strikes have come from. And I think if we talk about the national climate at the moment when it comes to strikes and people walking out and all the rest of it, is people don't mind being paid. People do mind being paid less, but if you're being paid less, but you feel it's fair and you can see why, and the money's being distributed fairly, then you're like, right, okay, you know what, let's crack on. It's when you've got businesses making a lot of money and some people on a hell of a lot of cash coming through, and yet those who are basically your ground force that are keeping things running, that are running things day to day, there's no money for you. And I think that's where the biggest issue is. And I think that's where retention has had a big part to play. But again, it comes back to culture. It comes back to, I went to business recently and they said, what are you doing around retention? I said, well, we've done a cost of living crisis piece and we're trying to be as flexible as I can. I was like, okay, but when was the last time any of your staff had fun at work? And they kind of gave a look. Like, I guarantee all of you can look back, but particularly when you were younger, at roles you did when you were in a more junior position, and you remember the fun days. You don't remember the day-to-day work, you might remember something, but you remember the days you had fun, you remember the times you enjoyed, or you remember your best friend that you worked with, or you remember the best manager that you used to sometimes go and get a drink with or do something with. Where's that gone? Because yes, we've gone to flexible hybrid working, yes, people are working from home and those kind of things. But people stay in businesses because they enjoy the business they're working for, or they enjoy the manager they're working for. So where's that side? And that's a huge piece of retention, is staff are burning out because they're pulled left, right, and through the middle, as it were. But there's a huge piece there about people forgetting you're meant to enjoy what you do.
Yeah.
Yes, people enjoy going out and supporting tenants and getting a win, but you're also meant to enjoy the culture of the company you're with. And on those bad days where you used to have you get back to the office, it's been awful, but your colleagues will pick you up, or your manager will say, look, just go and take an hour, go home an hour early, or whatever it will be. We'll catch up over a cup of tea at some point, we'll have a chat, or tell you what, let's go and have a cup now and have a proper breakdown of it. That's gone because people then go home, they've got nowhere to let go of that, and they feel alone and isolated. So there's a big piece around making sure that hybrid working is really working in favour of both sides, and people, I guess, valuing that human connection again, because it is important. It's really, really important. And be that in recruitment and retention, I'm not going to go and join a business if I walk in and it's deadly silent and no one wants to be there and everyone's looking a bit sad and half the you're in a big building and 2/3 of it's empty. I'm like, why do I want to join here?
Yeah.
No matter what I'm being paid, this doesn't look like an enjoyable place to work. So those first impressions when it comes to recruitment and retention are massive at the moment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And actually, on that point, I've actually just been recruiting internally here this morning, and one of the interview questions that we gave the candidate was, "Tell me the last time you had fun." And it's so interesting to hear the response to that, and the recognition that it was a workplace example that they gave, and I thought that was wonderful to hear, that story. and potentially something that would have been missed in a hybrid role where they were spending lots of time at home. And I think
hybrid absolutely has its place. And I mean, I know businesses that do suddenly have gone, yeah, we need to bring our away days back in, or we used to do yoga in the morning. Right, tell you what, let's bring that back in, because even if a few people just travel in early or whatever it might be,
yeah,
they'll have something to do with colleagues. These things matter. And I think everyone got so excited about finally we can work from home, because social housing was way behind the curve in terms of people working from home. Some businesses weren't. Some businesses have been doing it for a while, but the majority of housing was like, this just accelerated things by 5-6 years.
Yeah.
But they've shown it can work, and people get excited by, great, I don't have the commute and I don't have this. But now people are going, I miss working with people. I miss seeing people every day. I feel it. Like I said, my business is me, myself, and I working from home in this room most of the time, unless my partner's at home. And I've joined co-working spaces and done things like that because I'm a social person and I need to be around people. And there are also days when I'm just going, I just need to have a rant at someone or something.
Yeah.
And there's only so many times that Katie can take that. So it's, but so the fact that you're advocating that as part of your interview question is huge, because people are like, they value having fun at work. They value that actually you're allowed to enjoy yourself at work.
Yeah.
That's the other side of it. So many businesses stopped doing that. Stopped being, you've got to, if you've got time to have a laugh, you've got time to work. And that might have to change.
No, 100%. I mean, we are social creatures at a fundamental level, and being around other people and having teammates to pick you up. I mean, the sorts of conversations that housing officers, income officers are having right now with tenants are often really challenging. And to take that all on, in spite of what else is going on in their own lives, let's not forget that, without the morale and the support and the fun of work, it's easy to see why people might move away from the sector. And it's such a credit to the social housing community and the landlords that they make work fun. They give people that platform to enjoy and to support each other. So yeah, I think
that take on their feedback, so they value them and they feel valued. And I think that's the other side of it is knowing that actually, and this is one thing I think sometimes that is missed of customers, of staff satisfaction surveys and things like that. Do you enjoy yourself? How do you feel about progression? Yada, yada, yada. It's all great. Do you feel valued, or when was the last time you felt truly valued in what you do? And that part is so telling, because quite often you just find, probably not valued. That isn't the term which right, but why don't you feel valued? Because that's a concern. Because if you don't feel valued, you're not going to stay very long.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Well, just one final topic just to pick on. I think it'd be remiss of me not to, when we're chatting recruitment, when we're chatting social housing. We've seen so many things in our lives change as a result of our exit from the European Union and Brexit. How's that played out in social housing? Have we found a skill shortage? Have we found other challenges, material? I don't know. Talk to me about that, Matthew.
Yeah, I think particularly in, I guess, the asset management and the repairs side of things. So I'm part of District 4. We are a network of independent recruiters who want to do it by ourselves, but who don't want to be alone. So we share resources, we share a CRM, we've got other things that we do, but we all work in our own specified field. And a good friend of mine's become a good friend over the last 3 years, called Ian, specialises in maintenance and operatives and the asset management side. It's had a massive impact, absolutely massive impact. And also it's created you talked before about people coming into the country who might be wanting to try different roles or coming over and getting involved, or who can support communities that are already here. And I think that's the other massive area. There are so many communities, so many hundreds of communities in Britain that aren't British, by that aren't traditionally English. I know what I'm trying to say. I'm sure it's coming across okay. I hope so. We've got so many European and other communities living here, and yet we'd love to hire Romanian speakers or whatever it might be to come on and go, hey, look, can you come and work with XYZ? Because we'd love people who can speak Romanian and go over and, oh, well, you can't, because you can't work here. And things like that have created a big impact. And I think also, cultures very much unto themselves are something that's, the more broad your culture is as a business, the better you run. That's just That's just
Yeah.
fact. We've seen it in so many studies. And so when I look at skill shortages, when I look at certainly supply shortages as well, are massive. When these maintenance teams think, right, well, we've got to fix X, Y, Z, right, well, we can't get supplies,
Yeah.
so it's now gone up so exponentially. They're trying to use different materials, or you're trying to find other ways to fix it. Suddenly, little problems become bigger problems, become very large problems very quickly, whereas previously that wasn't the case. And I also know, unfortunately, of people who are European or not white British who have felt that those people who maybe celebrated Brexit over the top in businesses, they then felt, well, I don't want to be here because I don't feel it's a company that wants diversity in that way. And that isn't the full decision behind why the decision was made, but it's how people feel and maybe how the national rhetoric went with it. So it's an interesting one. I don't think it's going to improve because we've got a massive skill shortage in so many sectors in Britain anyway. Everybody is clamouring to hire the staff, and I mean the NHS is clamouring for every single person they can get, and everyone else is doing it. So social housing as a sector that people don't know about, as a sector that going through school you never hear about as a sector to go work in, despite the fact you can work as anything and everything in social housing. As an industry that really does have a social value, like the police or the fire service or the NHS, whatever it will be. But again, people don't know about it. That pool of people they're trying to recruit from is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Mm-hmm. And yet we've made that smaller through decisions like Brexit. So it's inevitably going to have a knock-on effect. But it's kind of decisions made. And I think this is where I go back to my earlier kind of point when I said, have a look at people who haven't worked in housing and really think, and this is the challenge I give to every provider, really think about what you can teach someone in that first month. Because if you're recruiting for anything at a more entry or junior level, that first month you teach so much anyway, regardless of if someone's come in with experience or not. So when you say, oh, they have to have worked in housing or have to have worked as this, that, or the other before, do they? Or do they just have to have the core values that match your own? And they have to have the core values and skill sets? Are they good at administration if there's going to be a lot of paperwork? Yes, but that can be in any sector. Are they empathetic? Right, well, you don't need to have worked in housing to be empathetic. There's people in housing who aren't empathetic. So there needs to be a big mindset shift. And then I guess adversely then, make sure that unless you absolutely have to, if you're recruiting for any senior roles or executive roles in housing, for now, try your very best to recruit from within, because that's also going to attract people to the sector. If they go, oh, I started off as a support worker and now I'm a director of whatever, the more stories we have like that, the more people look at it as a sector to go, I'd love to come and work in this, rather than going, yeah, I came in there, I reached manager, I could never get promoted, so I left.
Yeah.
And that is more damaging to the sector.
Yeah, no, I think that's a brilliant note to finish things on, Matthew. I think some real key takeaways in just that last 60 seconds. So it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, Matthew. And I'd encourage all of our listeners to join the Social Housing Roundtable through all the channels that Matthew mentioned earlier. And of course, if you are income related, join the Income Service Networking Group. Thank you so much for joining us today, Matthew.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to come on board. It really has been.
Not a problem. Enjoy the rest of your day. Speak soon.
Cheers, and you. Take
Thanks,
care.
Matthew. Bye.
Bye.